Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Dali and today I'll be sharing 5 easy weeknight recipes that my kids really like. The first recipe that I'll be sharing with you is a one-pot pasta. This is actually a recipe that we eat about once every other week. It is super easy, quick to prepare, and always a hit with the kids. All you need for this recipe is a few cloves of garlic, a small to medium onion, about 2 cups of cherry tomatoes, half a cup of basil leaves, and of course the pasta. So I normally use spaghetti, but you can use angel hair or linguine, whichever pasta you may like, but you might have to adjust your cooking time. You will also need about 2 cups of chicken or beef broth, as well as 1 cup of water. And for the seasonings, you'll need salt, pepper, some chili flakes, and of course olive oil. To start the recipe, I have all of my tomatoes and I chop my garlic and onion. I throw it all into the pot. I get my basil leaves. In this case, I actually finished my basil bush because I've had it for a few weeks and it was starting to not grow so well anymore. So I chop it all up and I throw it into the pot. Once that's all done, and I personally like to do it ahead of time before the kids come back home, I season it all up. I put some olive oil, salt, pepper, and chili flakes in it, mix it all up, and let it sit there until I'm ready to cook. Once I'm ready to cook, I throw my pasta into the pan, pour my broth in and some water. I bring it to a boil, mix all the pasta in, close the lid, and let it cook for 20 minutes on medium. I've done this recipe so many times that I don't actually use any measurements. I kind of just eyeball it all, but I will leave a link in the description to a very similar recipe. I normally serve mine with some sort of vegetable on the side, as well as a garlic bread or just normal bread and some Parmesan on top. Please ignore that little hanging pasta. Next up on our list is crispy chicken fingers or crispy chicken tenders, which, as most crispy things are well liked in our house. All you need for this recipe are 2 to 3 chicken breasts. I like to have mine somewhat frozen when I cut them. You will need flour, egg, and panko, or you could use breadcrumbs. And for seasonings, I like to use paprika, garlic, and onion powder, as well as a bit of cayenne and salt and pepper, but you could adjust those to your liking. Pretty much for all crispy things, I like to use the 3-plate coating method. So I take my chicken, I coat it in flour mixed with all the seasonings, I coat it in egg, and lastly I coat it in panko, and then I repeat for all of my chicken tenders. As you can see, I use tongs because I don't like to get my hands dirty. On this day, I paired the chicken with some air-fried crispy potatoes, as well as some broccoli on the sides. It's really simple to do. All you need to do for the potatoes are chop them in whatever shape you may like. I do prefer the cubes. And then you season them with olive oil, salt, pepper, and sometimes a bit of paprika. This time I didn't because my kids didn't like it last time. And I put them in the air fryer and turn them on fries mode, which is about 200 Celsius for 20 minutes. Next, I have to fry my chicken. Now that is also something you can do in the air fryer, but I do prefer to do it on oil. It's not as healthy, but it definitely tastes a little crispier and better. At the same time, I also threw some broccoli into the pot with butter and mixed it up. The chicken only needs to cook for about 2 minutes on each side, and once it's nice and golden brown, I take it out. I always like to take the thickest one and cut it in half just to make sure that it's well cooked. By the time I'm done with the chicken, I have my potatoes, and voila, dinner is served. Next on a list of things that my kids would enjoy for dinner is beef stew. This is really a recipe that uses whatever is left in my fridge, but the very basics that you would need would be carrots, onions, celery, some beef cubes, as well as a cup to a cup and a half of red or white wine, water, and seasonings to your liking. Now, optionally, you could also add mushrooms, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and even a butternut squash. Since this is a slow cooker recipe, I normally start it in the morning. I start by cutting up my vegetables and browning the meat. That is actually optional. I've done it before without browning the meat and it turns out just fine, but I do like the texture a little bit better when I brown the meat first. Next, I put it all into the crock pot, and on the same pan, I soften my vegetables. Again, this is optional, but I like the texture better. And then I add that to the crock pot as well. I add some wine, some water, salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and mix it all up. I close the lid and cook it for 6 to 8 hours on low or 3 to 5 hours on high. Now the next thing I'll show you is completely optional and only if you have the time, but my kids absolutely love when I make homemade bread with this, and it's so easy to make. All you need for this is about 3 cups of flour, some dried yeast, some hot water, oil, salt, honey, and that's it. I normally don't measure, I just eyeball my ingredients, but I will put a link in the description to a similar recipe. I combine all my ingredients and put them in the mixer to make the dough. I let my dough sit for a few hours until it's doubled in size, and then I stretch it out on a sheet pan and cover it up to rise some more. At this point, I check on my beef stew, and if everything looks good, I move on. About 40 minutes before it's time for dinner, I take out my dough and it's risen nicely. I add a generous amount of olive oil on top, I put some salt, and this time I put chives on half of it for me and my husband and some garlic powder and put it in the oven on 450 degrees for about 15 minutes. It comes out beautifully. About 5 minutes before I serve, I add some cornstarch slushy to my stew because my kids like it a little bit thicker. And that's it. Bon appetit! Next is another comforting cold weather recipe, which is my Russian-styled stuffed peppers. I would say this is the most complicated of all the recipes I'll be sharing, but it's well worth the effort because it is absolutely delicious, and my kids adore it. For this recipe, you will need bell peppers, and I also use tomatoes to stuff. I use the mini ones because they're the best for kids, but you can use full-sized bell peppers as well. You will need ground meat, 2 to 3 carrots, a large onion, a head of garlic, butter, an egg, some parsley, and of course, seasonings that you would like. Also, you will need tomato sauce. I make my own, but you could use the pre-made stuff as well. The very first thing I'm going to do is cook my rice, and while this is cooking, I will start preparing my peppers. So I cut the top up and cut the seeds out, and then my peppers are ready for the stuffing. Then if you are making your own sauce, you want to cut some vegetables for the sauce. So I have carrots, onion, and garlic. I actually normally also have a celery, but this day I didn't have any, and I will put it in the pan to soften, in which I will later add some canned tomatoes to blend it all up when it's done. Now, while this is cooking, I will go ahead and prep my tomatoes by cutting out the tops and scooping the middle with a spoon. That middle part I actually chop up and throw into my tomato sauce as well. Next, I grate some carrots and I will go ahead and cook them with onion. I will season it with some salt and pepper, a bit of paprika, and let them soften. Once they're soft, I will add my garlic. Let it cook for about a minute or so and take it off the heat, and now we're ready to assemble the stuffing. For the stuffing, we're our ground beef, parsley, carrot, onion, garlic mixture, 1 egg, and some seasonings together and mix it all up with our hands. Now we're finally ready for the stuffing, so I will take my peppers and I will stuff them really well with the mixture, and I'll close them all up. I will do the exact same things with my tomatoes as well, and and sometimes I still have some beef left. And what I do is I just make little meatballs with it. My youngest one actually prefers those to the stuffed vegetables. I put everything in a pan, and this time I used a small saucepan because the big one was used, and honestly this was a big mistake. I should have washed the other one because this made a big mess. In any case, we learned from our mistakes. The next thing I did was pour my tomato sauce on top of everything and cover it up with a lid. I cooked it on medium for about 30 to 40 minutes. And there you have it, my stuffed peppers, which are so delicious and comforting. The very last recipe I have for you is fish and chips, and this one is probably the kids' favorite. So for this recipe, you will need 4 fillets of firm white fish. My favorite to use is basa, and then you will need some flour, seasonings, egg, and panko breadcrumbs to coat it. You can actually use any breadcrumbs, but I find panko to work the best. I use the exact same method as with the chicken, so I take my fillets, I cover them up with the seasoned flour, then with the egg, and then with the breadcrumbs, and I use the tongs to do it because I don't want to get my hands dirty, especially not when I have a fussy baby attached to me. I normally coat those ahead of time and then just fry them when it's time to eat. They only take a few minutes to fry. As you can see, my oil was a little bit too hot with the first two, so they came out a little bit darker, but normally they're supposed to be golden brown and you cook them for about 2 minutes per side. On this specific day, I didn't have much time or energy to cook, so I served those with pre-made frozen fries that I cooked in the air fryer and some salad. My kids absolutely love to eat those with vinegar, which I find really funny because it's not a typical thing a child would like.
It's really yummy.
You got vinegar.
I told you there was some better in the world.
Just a little bit.
That's a tiny drop. No, not this.
Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please click the like button, consider subscribing, and leave a comment if you have any more ideas for anything else you'd like to see on my channel.